Hey guys, Phil Cook here. I'm making this video to respond to some of the comments, some of the questions about my previous video on the UPS crash. I think just as important as putting my thoughts out there, it's responding to your guys' comments. There have been hundreds of responses to the video, and so it's sometimes difficult for me to respond to each specific one, especially considering that, this isn't my business. This is what I do for fun. I like sharing. I like engaging with you guys. I like putting that information out there. And so I'm going to try and make this hopefully a short video where I'm trying to answer as many questions as I can. If you haven't seen the original video, go watch the original video. If you can like and subscribe, I appreciate it. Again, YouTube is not my business. I just do it for fun. I like sharing. I like educating. All right. So first and foremost, I want to talk about one that has come up multiple times is my ums and ahs. I am not a YouTuber. I do not write scripts. If I am giving you information, again, these are all my opinions. These are all unscripted opinions. They are often off the cuff. And I don't make a script. I basically just use like a quick outline of things I want to say to try and stay on topic. Otherwise, I can just blather on, I was a teacher before I worked in aviation. I was also a bus driver. I worked in IT. So I'm used to educating people. I'm used to teaching people. I'm used to answering questions. Maybe I'm a better debater than I am a better writer and reporter. Plus, I'm old. So sometimes if I'm saying it's because I can't remember, right? As you get older, little details, names, and stuff like that become harder to remember. So bear with me if I say my ahs and ums, but I appreciate all your responses. I appreciate all the love you guys gave on that video. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is somebody said it's not unprecedented. The separation of the wing happened before. Yeah, once before on an MD-11, a separation happened. Sure, if you don't want to say unprecedented, I would say extremely unlikely. It is very extremely unlikely that a separation happens from an aircraft pylon. So basically, it's rare that it happens. A lot of testing goes into a lot of these pylons. You can watch a lot of YouTube videos of engines having entire turkeys shot into them, suffering catastrophic failure, and they become damaged, explode, whatever, but very rarely do they separate from the pylon. These pylons are designed to take a lot of G's of force. I know I talked to a former MD-11 guy, and he talked about how some of the early MD-11s could not take that side load. And so with that side load, it caused a lot of unknown G-force on the pylons. But straight up, they're taking thousands of pounds of thrust. It is pretty rare, if not unprecedented, for a pylon to damage and completely separate an engine from the wing. We often don't consider that when we consider training for single engine. We consider massive damage. We consider, cowling blows out, something like that, unusual vibration. But normally we don't consider a complete separation of an engine from a pylon. So is it unprecedented? Sure. Is it rare? Sure. However you want to describe it. So the next fact I wanted to talk about is older airplanes. So I've seen a couple comments where they talked about why are they still flying these older airplanes? Oh, these planes are so old, it's dangerous. Well, yeah, the airplanes are old. They often will require more maintenance, and that maintenance is costly. But you have to realize that for a lot of these cargo companies and airlines in general, they're getting these airplanes at a steep discount, and they already have an extremely built up maintenance system that keeps those airplanes safe and flying in the sky. So these aircraft have, not a few new, trained engineers who just know about it, say something like an A220, which is fresh off the line. These planes have old guys, they've got thousands of maintenance personnel, thousands of parts in the pipeline, and hundreds of airplanes that they can reference, that they can repair, that they have the experience in. So it's much easier to have an older aircraft and keep it maintained just through a logistics sense as well as a cost effectiveness sense. The next thing about it is also these aircraft go through what we call maintenance programs. So maintenance programs are dictated by the FAA. They're agreed upon by the FAA and the airlines when they create their standard operating procedures. And basically all it does is it says, look, these are the problems we've had with these airplanes in the past. These are the problems you need to check on a regular. Often, if you're going through flight training, you know that most aircraft have to have an annual. They have to have a 100-hour if it's a commercial aircraft used for some sort of commercial use. Well, when you go to a major company, it's not always there's always an annual, but it's not always a 100-hour. What they'll have is they'll have a set program specific for that aircraft and for that type of operation dictated by the FAA. So for my company, the aircrafts will go through regular maintenance. They'll go through daily checks by maintenance. They'll go through daily oil checking of things like the oil system, hydraulic systems, and things like that. Every time we land, there's literally like 5 or 6 maintenance personnel. One will come on board, he'll check the systems, the rest will walk around the aircraft, they'll check the oils, they'll check the tires, they'll check everything. Before every flight, there is a group of maintenance that go out. Even when we push back and start, we have maintenance that sit there and they make sure that everything looks okay and everything is okay. And once we have 2 good engine starts and everything seems stable, we let them know everything's good up here and we're ready to go. They disconnect the headsets from the ground crew and we go. And they don't leave until we taxi out. So it's a pretty extensive maintenance program. Again, we don't know exactly what the cause of that engine separation or that damage was. It could be, undue maintenance. It could be, some sort of abnormality that was impossible to detect. And sometimes that happens as well. I've had plenty of flights in which we put an aircraft into maintenance because it had systemic problems that were unable to reproduce. For example, we had recently an aircraft that we had to leave in Denver and swap aircrafts where we had that airplane for about 2 days and then another crew took it out for a day and then we took it back for a third day. And all of us reported that we had when switching from the APU bleed system to the engine bleed system, we got a warning of a equipment cooling vent slowly open and closing, right? Normally it closes relatively quickly and we don't get a warning. Well, we got a warning saying that was an issue. And basically, when you looked at our reference handbook, it said you could have a loss of cooling of the equipment from the engine's vents, and basically you could lose your equipment within a certain amount of time. They recommend landing as soon as practical. So even though it was just a simple matter of the warning came up and it went away, it was still something that if it broke on somebody else, it was recommended that you land the airplane as soon as practical because it could be, I wouldn't say catastrophic issue, but it could be a significant issue. And so after maintenance went through it, they changed the valve. We flew it that third day and it came back again. And so it could just be an erroneous sensor, but because the maintenance program is relatively rigorous, they grounded that airplane while they continued to investigate and we were given another airplane. So sometimes it's like that. Sometimes it may be a erroneous warning. It may be a caution that pops up and you just don't know. It could be something significant. It could just be a bad wire. I've had tons of maintenance issues where it was just a bad wire or, a bad connector, bad sensor. Not specifically what that issue was. It gets fixed, it gets reported. And so that's how those maintenance programs work. Now, as far as, again, as those aircraft being old, they are often constantly torn down. Engines are torn down and rebuilt. Airframes are rebuilt. Landing gear, tires are constantly changed. So it may be an older aircraft. And I fly the 767, 757. A lot of these aircraft are 40 plus years old, but they have been rebuilt so many times that they're workhorses. They're solid aircraft. So yes, you do have a lot of older aircraft flying in the air, but that does not mean that they're unsafe. So I wouldn't. The MD-11 is used by a lot of cargo carriers. I think whatchamacallit, UPS, their cells, I think have like over 100 or so MD-11s. It's a very popular aircraft used around the world for cargo. They know all the maintenance problems. It's gone through numerous upgrades that have made it a safer and more capable aircraft. And so I don't think you would have to worry about MD-11s being particularly unsafe. All right. The next one to talk about is, why don't they have longer runways? If runway runoffs are a problem, why don't they have longer runways? Now, the interesting thing about longer runways is longer runways does not mean shorter takeoff rolls. So one of the big things about these companies that a lot of people don't realize is airlines are all about efficiency. They don't want to waste fuel and they don't want to waste money. So when I take off, we often have derated climbs. We often have derated takeoffs using temperature. Some companies call it a flex temperature. We may call it a derate, whatever it is. We basically look at conditions such as how long is the runway, how hot is it, how heavy are we, what kind of performance do we really need. So we may take off from, I think one of our shortest runways is going to be Allentown, Illinois. I think it's around 6,000 or 7,000 feet. Not super short, but short enough for a 767. We do typically take off with flaps 5, but in that airport, we take off with flaps 15. We consider it a short runway. Now, when we do a really short runway, we use just about 100% of that engine's capability for taking off. Now, if I'm in a place like Denver, Denver's a high altitude airport. It can be very cold. It can be very hot. That'll affect engine performance, but it's a massively long runway. It's about 12,000 feet on each runway. Plenty of runway for large aircraft to take off. But because it's so long, we actually don't use 100% of our power. We actually realize we can accept a longer runway roll before we take off because it's more efficient for fuel and more efficient for the aircraft. Most places we can do 100% takeoffs, but we just normally don't do it. Actually, the majority of times we do full power takeoffs is to test a system. We don't normally do it when we take off. Almost all the time we do some sort of derated takeoff and we do some sort of derated climb out. We just don't need to burn that much fuel and use that much power, especially if we have a longer runway. So even if they did have longer runways, companies and aircraft manufacturers would just adjust those takeoff rolls so that it's more efficient and you don't get up faster. It's just more efficient on the engines, more efficient on the fuel consumption. Because again, the efficiency isn't just fuel consumption, it's also wear and tear on the engines. So even though that aircraft probably could have gotten up faster if it was using all engines, they probably would have done a calculated takeoff roll that may have been longer than it could do because they just don't need to use all that power. That's why when we do single engine ops, we don't really take into account speed as far as takeoffs or speed as far as, speed as far as climbing out. What we want is if we lose an engine on the takeoff roll itself, we know that with the V2 speed, that's the speed that we need to accelerate to. It's typically higher than the rotate speed or the V1 speed. We need to get to that speed to maintain a single engine climb out. And once we get to about 1,000 feet above the ground, we're trying to get even faster than that to keep that speed going. So in our situation for the 7.6, when we lose an engine on takeoff, typically we will, when we're on a normal takeoff, we will accelerate to V2 plus 80, right? or sorry, I'm our safe minimum plus 80. So if I say like our flaps 30 return speeds like 120, we're gonna bump it 80 knots. So when we are doing a single engine operations for my company, our flow is shoot for a minimum of 200 feet per minute. So instead of calling for speed, we call for vertical speed 200 because we want to accelerate that plane to get above our V2 speed and have that buffer because we no longer have that lift capacity. We need that speed in order to maintain that aircraft and not stall that aircraft. So again, it's like, would a longer runway have made a difference? Possibly, because they would have probably rotated at maybe either a slower speed or actually not a slower speed. They would have rotated at a faster speed. They would have eaten up more runway with the derated temperature or derated throttles. So it may have helped, but I'm going to be honest, they would have probably eaten up the majority of that runway just through efficiency calculations. So that's the whole thing about that. So longer runways aren't going to help because even longer runways still suffer overruns. Longer runways still suffer accidents because it's all about efficiency. So that's that answer. The next one, someone had asked me, do pilots do walkarounds and look for maintenance things along with maintenance? Absolutely. Every flight, before and after, I do a walk around to see if anything's broken, to see if we've broken anything, to check for bird strikes, to check for things like hydraulic leaks, damage to the aircraft from some sort of maintenance malfunction, bird strike, lightning strike, whatever. All that stuff has to be looked at, reported. So typically what I do and how we operate at my company, some companies, they do the pilot monitoring, will do the walk around while the pilot flying may program the box. I find that for me, 90% of the time, even if I'm flying, I will do, as the first officer, I will do the walk around. Again, it may be different at your company, but typically that's how I do it. The captain will go up and do the internal checks, the security check, and get things up and running. And as first officer, I typically program, but I will start by going off and doing the walk around. And so when I'm doing the walk around, again, I'm checking tires, I'm checking hydraulic lines. And what I'm doing is I'm obviously not capable of just getting up there and grabbing everything and checking everything out. But I'm looking for obvious defections, right? I'm looking for leaks. I'm looking for rust. I'm looking for bald spots on tires. I'm looking for cracks. We have brake pins that tell you if the brakes are worn. I'm checking for that. I'm looking for any bird strikes. I'm looking for overpressurizations. I'm looking for cracks, damage. I'm looking for, I'm checking the static wicks. I'm checking for any possible tail strikes from a previous crew or even myself afterwards. I'm looking at all these things and I need to be knowledgeable as to where things are, how they should look. Obviously the systems, I'm checking the blades on each rotor and all propellers or whatever, or each turbine. We actually look at that. So we have an acceptable amount of damage that can be to those turbine blades. Sometimes they'll have nicks. But often what will happen is if they have a nick, a significant nick, it'll be grinded down, it'll be tested, and maintenance will circle it. They'll put a note. And so we have in our maintenance log, it'll tell us, hey, this blade has damage. It's within tolerable limits. This thing is broken. It's within limits. It's been written up. So we have a program that allows certain things to be broken and for the aircraft to still fly. So we do these things as well, but unfortunately, there are internal systems we can't see. There are internal systems we can't see. There are things that happen between flights, happen between maintenance issues, and it's just, it's impossible to check. You look at your car all the time. You probably check your oil. You probably check your fuel. You check your coolant. It's impossible for you to get up in the morning, check the status of your bearings. We just assume it's running right, it sounds right. We put in the oil is right, it looks good. We check the quality, and so unless you're tearing down that engine and doing a full check, it is very difficult for you to know some of the internal things. Now, with a aircraft, often those engines over certain hours they will have a program that they will take that engine off and they will completely rebuild it. But it's over a certain amount of hours. It could be thousands of hours. So unless something pops up where we're getting unusual vibration, we're getting oil pressure issues, we're getting temperature issues, and we monitor these things whenever we start that engine. We monitor the oil pressure, we monitor the fuel flow, we monitor the engine temperatures, we monitor the fan speeds, vibrations, and unless something pops up that tells us that something's out of regulations, out of spec, we just don't know. I'm sure that between the hangar or their parking spot and getting to the runway, they probably had, if any, no indications that there were any sort of problems with the aircraft. We don't do run-ups like you would in a 172. It would be it would eat up so much fuel and be an issue for the airport as far as noise, as far as causing issues with the other aircraft and other objects around us. We don't do run-ups. A lot of these systems are checked, if not the night before, days before. They will do a run-up. They'll take that aircraft out and they'll test it to make sure everything looks good. But who knows what could pop up? It could be moisture, it could be oil, it could be fuel, it could be temperature. A lot of things can affect these very delicate, but robust machines. So that's answering some of those questions. Keep asking questions. I love answering questions. I love these follow-up videos because I try to read as many comments as I can. I try to respond when I can. If I don't respond, don't think it's a personal thing. Again, this isn't my job. I do this for fun. I don't monetize. I don't advertise. I don't ask for coffees. I'm a pilot. I'll be fine. I do these things for fun. I love sharing my knowledge. I love engaging with people. Maybe one of these days I'll do a live stream and you guys can just fire away and we'll talk, and hopefully if there's any questions that haven't been answered, someone else will ask that question and we'll get it answered. I appreciate all the new subscribers. I appreciate all the new viewers. I don't post that often. I will try to post more. A lot of times I just post, smaller things about the aviation career, about my time working in cargo. I try to share some of my times overseas and at some of the places that I fly to. If you guys have any more questions, keep leaving those comments. I appreciate all the love. I appreciate all the condolences. I appreciate all the support you guys gave me. If you're interested in aviation, I'm considering doing some more counseling. I am still a certified CFI flight instructor, CFI, CFII. I taught for about 3 years on and off. I still do some counseling, mostly for check rides. I normally do counseling for check rides. I do mock orals and things like that. So I may get back into that as kind of like a side hustle. I enjoy doing that. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments. If you are working on your aviation and you have some questions for me, feel free to message me. I'll try to answer them if I can. And you guys have a safe day, and thanks for all your support.